family, and that's Alzheimer's disease. It's probably one of the most devastating disorders that you can imagine. Most of my scientific career I spent researching brain cancer. Brain cancer is bad. And I used to say, I could not imagine anything more devastating than a brain tumor because it takes away the very essence of who we are. It takes away our memories, our personalities, our ability to create and interact with our loved ones, our language. But unlike brain cancer, where you can live for a while and then you go down very fast, and maybe the bad time is a few months. When I experienced Alzheimer's disease after my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I realized that Alzheimer's was really the most devastating, because Alzheimer's also takes away the very essence of who we are. Takes away our memories, our ability to interact with our loved ones and family. But the bad time lasts a really long time. Not just 6 months, but potentially 10 years or more. And the toll that takes, not just on the patient, but the family and the caregivers, is really hard to imagine. Yep. Those of you who have experienced this in your family understand what I mean. So hopefully we were able to get the PowerPoint and the slides up. And what I would like to do is to share with you what we know about Alzheimer's, and then what we can do about it and how we plan to prevent it. So do we have the slides? And I think I'm going to have to ask for the slides to be fast forwarded. So the next slide. So when we think about Alzheimer's disease, why are we so concerned about Alzheimer's now? The reason we're so concerned about it is because we're living longer. Alzheimer's is a disease of aging. So you can imagine that in our parents' lifetime, it was unusual to see people, living past their 60s, right? In their parents' lifetime, the life expectancy was probably 40 or 50. But in our lifetime, the average life expectancy is about 79 or 80. And a child that's born today has a 1 out of 3 chance of living to 100. So we're living longer. The problem that we have is that our bodies are designed to outlast our brains. So we're learning how to take really good care of our bodies. We know to eat better and to exercise and keep, getting heart examinations, and so we can live longer. The problem is our brains are not really surviving this long. And it turns out that we actually start to lose intellectual ability at about age 30. So when you think about this, right, that's why you don't really see a lot of Nobel Prizes given in physics for anything that anybody discovered after 30, because most of your creative years are really before. And what this graph shows that you're looking at here is that really at about age between 25 and 30, our cognitive ability just with the normal aging process begins to decline. And why is that? The reason is that there's a very dynamic process that is taking place where the brain makes certain proteins, and it has to get rid of those proteins, because if it doesn't clear those proteins from the brain, those proteins become toxic. And they become waste proteins, and those waste proteins kill brain cells. So as we begin to age, we're accumulating more and more of these waste proteins over time, and the number of brain cells that we have begin to decline. And we have such a rich source of brain cells, and God blessed us with such an incredible brain. The brain is really the most incredible structure that I know of in the universe, and gave us such a reserve that we can lose a lot of brain cells before we really begin to notice an effect from it. So As a brain surgeon, I can actually remove about a third of someone's brain and not detect any decline in intellectual function or memory, as long as I know which third to remove. Right? And so what happens as we age is that we begin to lose brain cells over time. Some of us loses those cells faster than others. But after we've lost about half of our brain cells, now we begin to get cognitive ability. We're not thinking quite as fast. We're not remembering names quite as well. We don't remember where we put the car keys. And we begin to have symptoms of cognitive decline, early dementia. And then as we begin to go lower, we become much more symptomatic. So the whole key to this is really preventing that initial decline in brain cells to begin with, preventing sort of the decline and death that's caused by these buildup of these toxic waste proteins. When we think about the problem in terms of what we're facing, right? The population is aging, and we're getting older, and most of us now are living better and longer, and we certainly expect to live into our 80s and hopefully our 90s, and many of us expect to potentially make 100. The problem that we face is that by the time we actually get 65, 10% of us 65 and older will have Alzheimer's disease. By the time we get 85, 50% of us 85 and older will have Alzheimer's disease. And that number just keeps going up, so by the time we get 90, it's even higher. The amount of money that we currently spend taking care of those with Alzheimer's disease in the United States alone is $200 billion a year. So to put this in perspective, how much do you think we spend on cancer? Any guesses? About $59 billion. So we spend a lot more already on Alzheimer's and cancer. And what about heart disease? About $153 billion. So currently we're spending more money on Alzheimer's disease than anything else. And that number is set to increase dramatically to over $1 trillion a year because the number of people getting Alzheimer's disease is increasing as we live longer and as we age. Now, if we actually look at this, if I can have the next slide. As African Americans, this is a real problem for us because the data that I showed you was for the general population. As African Americans, our chances of getting Alzheimer's disease is twice that of the regular population. So as bad as the statistics were that I just shared with you, just like most other things in healthcare, for us it's twice as bad. Now, in the next slide, it's not because of our genetics, as far as we know now from the scientific evidence. The reason we believe that as African Americans, we probably have twice the incidence of Alzheimer's disease as the regular population, it's not genetic conditions, but it's because of medical conditions that we're not getting treated for. Things like high blood pressure. One of the highest risk factors of dementia with aging is high blood pressure. So if your blood pressure is high, not only are you at risk of getting cardiovascular disease, your risk of becoming demented goes up significantly. If you're diabetic, you have a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. There is a clear association between diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. And I will get into that association a bit more later. But some of us believe scientifically that Alzheimer's may actually be a type 3 diabetes, right? Doesn't mean that you have to be a diabetic to have Alzheimer's, but there is a clear correlation between the risk factors of diabetes and the risk factors for Alzheimer's. So all of that processed sugar that you're eating, all of that extra weight that you're carrying, that lack of exercise that you're doing, all the things that you've heard about that can decrease your risk of getting diabetes can also decrease your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. And all of the risk factors that you've learned about that increase your risk of getting diabetes can also increase your risk of developing Alzheimer's. High blood pressure may be damaging the small blood vessels in your brain, just like they damage the small blood vessels in your heart. And there is a form of dementia called vascular dementia, which is a different type of dementia than Alzheimer's, where you get these little mini strokes. Not a stroke big enough to make you paralyzed or lose your speech, but just little small strokes that go unnoticed, and you can get hundreds of those in your brain. And eventually that forms a vascular dementia. It's one type of dementia that's different from Alzheimer's, but there is a intermingling. There's a mixture between Alzheimer's dementia and vascular dementia that kind of goes hand in hand. Next slide. So we're spending billions of dollars to try to find an effective treatment for Alzheimer's disease. And as you read in the headlines, one treatment after the other fails, right? Becomes really discouraging. First you see Pfizer has a new promising drug in a phase 3 trial. It fails. Eli Lilly has spent billions, has a phase 3 drug in a trial. It fails. Merck drug fail. The reason that all of these drugs are failing is that we're trying to treat the end stage of the disease. So by the time you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, right, you're already symptomatic. So the way that we as neurologists, I'm not a neurologist, I'm a neurosurgeon, but my colleagues in neurology currently diagnose Alzheimer's disease, is that mom goes to the doctor, she's forgetting how to get to a friend's house. He does a memory test, and on that memory test it says you have Alzheimer's disease. Well, the problem with that scenario is that by the time you actually have memory loss, you've already lost half of your brain cells. And you've already lost half of your brain weight. So it's as if someone had diabetes, and they've had the diabetes untreated for 10 or 20 years, and they go to their doctor, and now they have blindness, kidney failure, end-stage heart disease, and the doctor says, oh, we got to control your glucose. Well, that's good, but it's not going to solve your kidney failure, right? So you have to prevent the disease from occurring in the first place. It's much better to prevent brain cells from dying than actually to regenerate brain cells and make them connect where they're supposed to connect. So the major challenge that we currently face in healthcare is how to diagnose Alzheimer's disease early enough that we can actually begin to treat it effectively. Because if we're treating it when we've already lost half of the brain cells, it's too late, or it's much more difficult, right? If I could treat it at the very beginning of the disease and actually prevent those cells from dying, I would have a much better shot at treating it. Even take the diabetic analogy. So even if I didn't have insulin for diabetes, and I knew that you were on your way of developing diabetes, and I could say, why don't we take you on a program where we're going to have you lose 10 pounds, and we're going to stop having you eat all of those potatoes, and put you on, complex carbohydrates and a much better diet, have you go out and exercise. I could have a pretty good chance of controlling your diabetes, even without insulin. In fact, I have a good chance of preventing you from going on insulin. Well, the same, we believe, is true for Alzheimer's disease. So if I can detect it early enough, I can potentially give you lifestyle changes that can help you slow down this process and potentially prevent it. And if I do need to treat it with medications, it's going to be much easier for me to treat with medications, right?